My name is Jack Thorne. For over 3 years, I've been running from the SCP Foundation. This is my story. I woke up into pitch darkness and held my pounding head. What the hell is going on? I muttered. I felt the ground around me, noticing that it was coarse dirt. I crawled along the dirt until I reached cold metal bars. I felt up and down the bars, assuming I was being housed in some type of temporary prison, probably built outside. Oh, this is just great, I growled to myself, slumping against the bars. I looked around, but it was too dark to really see anything. All that I knew was that someone was very interested in keeping me here. "Did you just get here?" A gravelly voice called out from somewhere in the darkness. "Who's that?" I yelled back, quietly relieved that I wasn't the only one stuck in this situation. "My name's James. Welcome to hell." I heard James shuffling as he moved closer that I could faintly see him through the darkness. "Where are we?" I asked. He just shrugged. "I've been here since last week, but it seems all the cells are full now. We'll know more about what's planned next in the morning, I think." James didn't seem upset or worried, or if he was excellent at covering up his emotions. I pondered my situation, wondering where I could be and who would be motivated enough to drag me here. I kept thinking until I eventually fell asleep against the cold metal bars, waking with a shock the following day when James slapped my face. "What the hell?" I called out, jumping back into consciousness. "Get up, dude. Something is happening," he said, looking intently into the distance. I stood up slowly and looked out. I presumed it was morning by now, but the surroundings were just as dark as they'd been earlier. I then realized the well ground was indeed dirt. We were undoubtedly inside of a building. Before long, the sounds of others emerging from the slumber filled the room, and slowly, light began to brighten my surroundings. Once the light was brought up, I was able to see that I was being housed inside one of many small cells in what looked like an enormous warehouse. My cellmate was a scruffy-looking young man, who had what looked like a blood splatter across his abdomen. He saw me looking at it, and smugly said, "Don't worry, it's not mine." I could see that everyone had between 1 and 4 cellmates depending on the size of their cell. I felt as though there was a pit in the bottom of my stomach. I was not looking forward to whatever these people had planned. A moment later, a loud blaring noise sounded, and the doors in everyone's cell swung open. Most people seemed to know the routine, and those that didn't followed along. We all shuffled out of our cells and walked single file down the far end of the warehouse where tables had been set up. Each place at the table had been set with a bowl containing some kind of food. Those who'd been here a while took their seats and ate hungrily, while new people ate with more caution. I took a spoonful of the gray sludge and eyed it closely. "Eat up, newbie," said a muscular guy at the next table. "You're going to need your strength." Although it looked pretty bad, it tasted like overcooked porridge. I've eaten far worse than that. While we were eating, someone new entered the room through a door in the back. It looked like a tall man shrouded in a black hood. From the hood, a jet black mask protruded. It was the type of mask that plague doctors wore during the Black Death, and it sent shivers up my spine. "Welcome, gentlemen," the figure said, instantly capturing the attention of everyone in the room. "I humbly thank you all for being part of my little science experiment here today. The work you've done as part of the experiment so far has done wonders for my research, and I'm greatly looking forward to the discoveries that are yet to be made." The hooded figure spoke without any irony in his voice. He sounded sincere in thanking us for being here against our will. Once he was done speaking, the figure turned sharply and disappeared back through the door from which he emerged. He was replaced by a tall man carrying a baton. "Right, preparation begins now." Suddenly, all the men started shoving each other as a large door opened on the far side of the room. Everyone ran to go through the door, the experienced people entering first, rushing to the cabinets that lined every wall. Mounted onto each of the cabinets were medieval weapons of every kind. Swords, spears, maces, whips, and many other brutal weapons that were being fought for. "Don't kill each other here, or you'll have the master to answer to," the man barked. With that threat in the air, everyone became a lot more civil, choosing a weapon each and standing ready at a large roller door that loomed at the end of the cabinets. After the rush, I grabbed what was left, a rusty old Morning Star. The ball was covered in tiny spikes and hung menacingly at the end of a long chain. I had no idea how I would use this weapon properly, but was promptly shoved by the commanding officer in with the rest of the group. Suddenly, the roller door slowly chugged to life, lifting slowly from the door and revealing the rest of the warehouse. We had been sleeping, eating, and choosing weaponry inside one half of the warehouse. This was the other half. It was a battle arena filled with walls, poles, cubbies, open spaces, and holes. It was a playground for those with a desire to kill. High up in the bird's nest of the center pole was the man in the black cloak and plague mask. He was holding a microphone. "You have 10 seconds to reach position, then let the experiment begin." A red light flooded the room and everyone panicked, racing around the room to find somewhere to either hide or prepare. I ran to the nearest pole I could find and climbed as high as I could before the red light turned green. Almost immediately, the room burst into shouts and screams of men engaged in war. Only seconds later, an arrow shot from a bow flew through the air like a missile and sunk itself deep into my arm. I screamed as I fell from the pole, landing in the sand below. "Idiot," I thought to myself. I panicked and not thought of an adequate hiding spot. My head wasn't in the game. I was thinking strategically. I got to my feet and raced to a nearby half wall. I crouched behind it and broke the shaft of the arrow. The arrowhead was embedded deep into my arm. I ripped off a strip from the bottom of my shirt and tied it around my arm to stop the flow of blood with my free hand and my teeth. I could hear someone breathing from the other side of my half wall. From the breath pattern, they were ready to attack. I started swinging my morning star, bracing myself for a head to appear from the top of the wall. It didn't. It emerged from the side, startling me and causing me to throw my weapon at him. It wasn't what the weapon was designed for, but it did knock him to the ground. I quickly composed myself and picked up the morning star, swinging it once again and this time burying it into his skull. The man whimpered as he slowly bled out. "Excellent," I heard a voice say. I spun around to see the plague doctor. The figure walked past me and lay his hand on the man I'd sunk my morning star into. His whimpering stopped. I ran away, leaving my weapon behind. What the hell was that? I thought as I ran, almost running into a man running from the opposite direction. "Whoa," the man said, his fist cocked and glowing with a strange light. "You're like me," I said, pointing to his fist. He looked skeptical, so I plunged my foot into a shadow that stretched along the ground. "What's going on?" I said, the screams of men only increasing in the room. "Most of them are dead," the man replied, "and those that die come back to life, even more ferocious than when they were alive." His voice trailed off as 3 men approached us. Their eyes were milky and glazed over, their expressions blank. One had a morning star embedded into his skull. After a moment of staring us down, the 3 men ran at us at full speed, screaming and flailing their arms. The first man ran to my new friend, whose glowing fist exploded into his face, causing his head to shatter into 100 crystallized pieces. I caught the second one, dodging a punch and shoving him into the wall. I then punched him on the back of the neck, breaking the fragile bones inside. He crumbled to the ground. By the time I looked up, my new friend had turned the third one into a pile of crystals. "The name is Andre," the man said, stretching out the hand that wasn't glowing. "Nice to meet you. Now, let's get the hell out of here." Before I could finish, an arrow whizzed past Andre's face, cutting through his ear and slicing his cheek. His ear burst into tiny crystals that rained onto the ground. His cheek didn't bleed. Instead, a deep blue fissure formed in his face. Jason's face fell a deep scowl. "We need to kill that bastard." We looked out. Across the room was someone who had positioned himself high up on one of the poles. The 2 of us started running across the room, dodging undead killers and arrows that flew down from up high. "Grab the pole and pull hard," Jason called out. I grabbed the pole tightly and sunk my feet into the shadow cast by the pole itself. I willed myself to be pulled deeper into the shadow, pulling hard against the pole. Meanwhile, Jason was pulling at his own face. He had grabbed the skin where the arrow had pierced him and was seemingly pulling out his cheek. After a few seconds of stretching and screaming, Jason had pulled a long, sharp crystal out of his face. He then held it tight and, in one swift movement, swiped the pole beneath where I was holding it. The crystal cut through the pole like a knife through butter. It fell to the ground, taking a screaming sniper down with it. "Let's go," Jason yelled, and we both ran to the far wall. He then stabbed the crystal into the wall, cutting a hole big enough for both of us to fit through. We climbed out and ran into the night. The hooded man stood from his vantage point and watched our escape intently, writing notes into a book before closing the cover. "A resounding success," he called out. "Send in the next recruits."
Stop till I hear him say, "Oh, oh."